Hey everyone, welcome back to all my listeners. Now, it's the day before Thanksgiving when this episode drops. So I wanted to, of course, thank all of my loyal listeners. Thanks to all my listeners for tuning in week after week, or if you're binge listening and catching up on seasons 1, 2, 3, and 4, know I appreciate you because it's you that continue to allow me to keep on going, to keep developing this valuable content as I continue to grow my podcast for this space of healthcare. Now, I hope you're all having a great day so far because pie is in your future, right? And if it's your first time finding me, thanks so much and welcome. Welcome to episode 13 of my 4th season. Today is Wednesday, November 24th, 2021. My name is Sonal Patel, and this is the Paint the Medical Picture podcast series. Now, I'm looking forward to spending my Thanksgiving with my family and some dear old friends, and just making some time for slowing down and simply enjoying. I have so much to be grateful for day after day. Now, all right, guys, I've got so much to get into today. Now, I'm going to be unpacking my compliance back to basics tip today in Examples of Medicare Fraud. And hey, remember, it's my favorite month-end episode where I do discuss highlights from the month of November's criminal and civil enforcement cases involving fraud, waste, and abuse. And I go ahead and round out today's episode with a remarkable quote on illumination from our very own Brené Brown. If you've checked me out on LinkedIn, you know I'm all about compliance and protecting our physicians and valued healthcare professionals when it comes to the business of medicine. I hope this week with me brings you enough to take back to your organizations, to want to dive in deeper, to use my tips and best practices to ensure success. I hope this podcast will help you boost the quality of documentation capture and improve coding accuracy as you help your providers paint the medical picture. If you like what you're hearing, go ahead and hit that subscribe button now so you don't miss another episode. Please write in a review and kindly drop me a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to my podcast. I'd really love your support. And as always, a friendly disclaimer. Remember, I'm bringing you the news, current healthcare industry news, my compliance tips and recommendations based on my over 10 years of experience in front office, back end, coding, and billing for multi-specialty physicians, compliance, and auditing for both E&M and surgical operative reports. These are my opinions alone and are not to be construed as legal advice. So, let's get into Newsworthy, the month's fraud, waste, and abuse cases. The month of November saw a whopping 47 cases as of the recording of this episode. Early November saw a community health services entity agreeing to voluntarily disclose and pay upwards of $18 million in a civil settlement. This substantial payment would resolve allegations of civil liability for submitting claims to Medicare for hospice and home health services that violated Medicare rules and regulations. According to the voluntary disclosures by the entity, between the year January 2012 and December of 2017, through several other affiliated entities, they acknowledged they submitted claims to Medicare for hospice and home health services that violated Medicare rules and regulations regarding physician certifications of terminal illness, patient elections of hospice care, and physician face-to-face encounters with home health patients. After the entity discovered these problems, they took corrective actions and disclosed the matter to the United States Attorney's Office. The acting U.S. attorney on the case said, quote, "The $18 million payment in this matter reflects the priority healthcare providers should place on making sure they closely follow all Medicare rules and regulations. Healthcare fraud remains a focus of the Department of Justice and the Affirmative Civil Enforcement Unit of the United States Attorney's Office. I commend them for taking this seriously, voluntarily disclosing these issues to our office and working to address the problems that led to these violations, end quote. Now, early November also saw a case regarding kickbacks in the field of anesthesia. Here, 3 anesthesia providers and several outpatient surgery centers, as well as their physician owners and an administrator, agreed to pay more than $28 million to resolve allegations that they entered into kickback arrangements by paying and receiving payments for medications, supplies, equipment, and labor, as well as free staffing in exchange for the referral of patients. Now, anesthesia providers typically depend on hospitals and outpatient surgery centers for their income. If an anesthesia provider can secure an exclusive contract for anesthesia services with a center, it is guaranteed a steady stream of patient referrals during the term of the contract. As a result, anesthesia providers compete aggressively for these contracts. But the government here alleges that between 2005 and 2015, these providers made payments for drugs, supplies, equipment, and labor, and provided free staffing to a number of outpatient surgery centers in order to induce the centers to select them to be their exclusive anesthesia providers. The government also alleges that these arrangements violated the anti-kickback statute in 42 U.S.C. Section 1320A through 7B and caused the submission of false claims in violation of the False Claims Act in 31 U.S.C. Section 3729. Early November also saw a case where 3 men admitted their roles in a $50 million healthcare fraud and kickback scheme. Each of these men played a role in defrauding healthcare benefit programs by offering, paying, soliciting, and receiving kickbacks and bribes in exchange for completed doctor's orders for durable medical equipment, or DME, namely for orthotic braces. Now, it's alleged that the DME companies paid kickbacks to these suppliers of DME orders in exchange for these DME orders, which the DME companies subsequently fraudulently billed to Medicare or TRICARE or the CHAMP VA, as well as other healthcare benefit programs. Now, the 3 men concealed their ownership of the DME companies by using others who were falsely reported to Medicare as the owners of the companies. The 3 men owned and operated multiple call centers as well, through which they obtained DME orders for beneficiaries of Medicare and other federal health care programs. The call centers paid illegal kickbacks and bribes to telemedicine companies to obtain DME orders for these beneficiaries. The telemedicine companies then paid physicians to write medically unnecessary DME orders. The DME orders were provided to DME supply companies owned by these 3 in exchange for bribes. The DME supply companies in turn provided the brace to beneficiaries and fraudulently billed the healthcare programs. The 3 also had business relationships with call centers where they obtained prescriptions for compounded medications and other medical products reimbursable by federal and private healthcare benefit programs. They provided these prescriptions for compounded medical prescriptions and other medical products in exchange for kickbacks and bribes from companies that fraudulently billed them to healthcare programs. And mid-November saw a disturbing case where a doctor was sentenced to 7 years in federal prison for performing unnecessary surgical procedures on patients and defrauding health insurance providers of $29 million. Court documents reflect for almost 4 years, beginning in early 2016 until the doctor's arrest in February 2020, the doctor performed hundreds of unnecessary invasive surgical procedures on patients. The doctor solicited the patients by establishing relationships with them in churches, in nursing homes, in a hospital, and in an outreach organization. In addition to subjecting the patients to unnecessary surgical procedures, the doctor victimized others by falsifying their medical records, reflecting surgical procedures that the doctor did not perform. This conduct resulted in the creation of erroneous and misleading records that could cause future doctors to determine a mistaken course of medical treatment for many of these patients. The acting U.S. attorney on this case said, quote, "This physician compromised the health and safety of his patients in favor of illegal profit. His acts not only violated the law, but the trust of his patients. With the assistance of our law enforcement partners, we remain vigilant to investigate and prosecute all who defraud our citizens for their own personal gain." End quote. And of course, there were also many, many of the usual suspects, like more opioids distributors, more kickbacks, more bribery schemes, more adult abuse cases, more fraudulent DME billing, more money laundering, and more expensive and unnecessary urine drug testing, once again. But I'd like to highlight cases involving COVID-19 schemes. First, an owner of multiple diagnostic testing laboratories was sentenced to 82 months in prison for an alleged scheme to defraud the United States and to pay and receive kickbacks through exploiting regulatory waivers put in place to ensure access to healthcare during the COVID-19 pandemic. This owner conspired with other co-owners of the company to pay illegal kickbacks to others in exchange for arranging for telemedicine providers to authorize genetic testing orders for these laboratories. They then exploited the temporary amendments to telehealth restrictions enacted during the pandemic, which were intended to expand access to care for Medicare recipients by making it easier for them to receive medical care at home. They took advantage of these waivers by using telehealth providers to authorize thousands of medically unnecessary cancer and cardiovascular genetic testing orders. In exchange, the laboratories gave these providers access to beneficiary information and the opportunity to bill for purported telehealth consultations with Medicare recipients, which often did not even take place. Now, the second case involves a doctor who was found guilty of fraudulently obtaining millions of dollars from the COVID-19 relief programs. Here, according to court documents, a doctor submitted several fraudulent Paycheck Protection Program, the PPP, and Economic Injury Disaster Loans in the EIDL loan applications to federally insured financial institutions, other Small Business Administration approved lenders, and the SBA, in the names of businesses with no actual operations or by otherwise misrepresenting the business's eligibility. In the applications, the doctor falsified the number of employees and payroll expenses and concealed prior criminal history. To support the fraudulent applications, the doctor submitted fake tax documents and the names of purported employees who did not, in fact, work for the businesses for which the doctor claimed that they were employed. The doctor received over $2.8 million in COVID-19 relief funds as a result of this fraud. And the third COVID-19 fraud case involves also PPP fraud by a physician. This case is also yet another in the world of electroacupuncture devices that I've discussed in prior episodes. This physician has agreed to pay over $500,000 to settle allegations of submitting false claims for the placement of electroacupuncture devices and for making false statements when applying for a loan from the Paycheck Protection Program, the PPP program. From 2017 to 2019, this doctor billed the Medicare and TRICARE programs for the surgical implantation of neurostimulator electrodes. Now, these are invasive procedures, usually requiring the use of an operating room, for which Medicare pays thousands of dollars in reimbursement. Now, neither the doctor nor his staff performed this surgical procedure. Instead, patients received devices used for electroacupuncture. This only involved inserting needles onto the patient's ears with the neurostimulator device taped behind their ears with an adhesive. Now, in addition to the financial settlement, the doctor and the entity have agreed to a 7-year period of exclusion from participation in any federal health care programs. In addition to the doctor's false medical claims, the doctor also allegedly made false statements when submitting an application to the PPP program in May 2020. Specifically, the application included a question whether the applicant or any individual owning more than 20% equity is subject to an indictment, criminal information, arraignment, or other means by which formal criminal charges are brought in any jurisdiction. However, when filling out the application, the doctor marked no and initialed below the box. But according to court documents, the doctor was in fact facing criminal charges in another county, which came about from prescribing opioid medications. So, as a result of this fraudulent application, the doctor wrongfully received this money. All right. Wow, right? So, the month of November to date has seen some pretty hefty enforcement actions once again. I do my very best each and every month trying to highlight those cases I find most interesting. I try my best to provide solid guidance and advice to providers to be mindful of correct coding and compliant billing practices to avoid joining these very serious, these very public, and often very hefty outcomes. I always believe these types of fraud, waste, and abuse cases are most helpful. So please take a deeper look into these reports and see how they may affect you, your provider, or your facility. Start self-auditing your service claims and coordinating documentation to ensure you are meeting compliance. And now it's time for my best practice tips in Trusty Tip. So, in today's new Back to Basics compliance tip, I wanted to focus on examples of Medicare fraud. I thought it was very fitting back to basics for my month-end episode and keep it all in the fraud family, so to speak. So, did you know the Medicare Program Integrity Manual, Chapter 4, is literally titled Program Integrity? I wanted to highlight the full details from it in Section 4.2.1, which is titled Examples of Medicare Fraud. Now it states, quote, this section applies to UPICs, SMRCs, and MACs. The most frequent kind of fraud arises from a false statement or misrepresentation made or caused to be made that is material to entitlement or payment under the Medicare program. The violator may be a provider or supplier, a beneficiary, an employee of a provider or supplier, or some other person or business entity, including a billing service or a contractor employee. Providers or suppliers have an obligation under law to conform to the requirements of the Medicare program. Fraud committed against the program may be prosecuted under various provisions of the United States Code and could result in the imposition of restitution, fines, and in some cases, imprisonment. In addition, a range of administrative sanctions, such as exclusion from participation in the program, and CMPs, or civil monetary penalties, may be imposed when facts and circumstances warrant such an action. Fraud may take such forms as, this is not an exhaustive list. And here they list out all of the examples of fraud forms. Incorrect reporting of diagnoses or procedures to maximize payments. Billing for services not furnished and or supplies not provided. This includes billing Medicare for appointments that the patient failed to keep. Billing that appears to be a deliberate application for duplicate payment for the same services or supplies. billing both Medicare and the beneficiary for the same service, or billing both Medicare and another insurer in an attempt to get paid twice. Altering claim forms, electronic claim records, medical documentation to obtain a higher payment amount. Soliciting, offering, or receiving a kickback, bribe, or rebate, which means paying for a referral of patients in exchange for the ordering of diagnostic tests and other services or medical equipment. Unbundling or exploding charges. Completing certificates of medical necessity for patients not personally and professionally known by the provider. Participating in schemes that involve collusion between a provider and a beneficiary or between a supplier and a beneficiary. Participating in schemes that involve collusion between a provider and a MAC employee where the claim is assigned, which means where the provider deliberately overbills for services and the MAC employee then generates adjustments with little or no awareness on the part of the beneficiary. Billing based on gang visits, which means when a physician visits a nursing home and bills for 20 nursing home visits without furnishing any specific service to individual patients. Misrepresenting dates and descriptions of services furnished or the identity of the beneficiary or the individual who furnished the services. Billing non-covered or non-chargeable services as covered items. Repeatedly violating the participation agreement, assignment agreement, or the limitation amount. Knowingly allowing a beneficiary to use another person's Medicare card to obtain medical care. Giving false information about provider ownership or using the adjustment payment process to generate fraudulent payment. They go on and talk about examples of cost report fraud include, and this is not an exhaustive list, and they state, incorrectly apportioning costs on cost reports, including costs of non-covered services, supplies, or equipment in allowable costs. Providers making arrangements with employees, independent contractors, suppliers, and others that appear to be designed primarily to overcharge the program through various devices like commissions or fee splitting to siphon off or conceal illegal profits. Billing Medicare for costs that were not incurred or were attributable to non-program activities, other enterprises, or personal expenses. Repeatedly including unallowable cost items on a provider's cost report for purposes of establishing a basis for appeal. Manipulating statistics to obtain additional payment, such as increasing the square footage in the outpatient areas to maximize payment. Claiming bad debts without first genuinely attempting to collect payment. Making improper payments to physicians for certain hospital-based physician arrangements. Paying amounts to owners or administrators that have been determined to be excessive in prior cost report settlements. Reporting days improperly that result in an overpayment if not adjusted. Depreciating assets that have not been fully depreciated or sold. Using depreciation methods not approved by Medicare. Repaying interest expense for loans that were for an offset of interest income against the interest expense. Reporting program data where provider program amounts cannot be supported. Allocating costs improperly related to organizations that have been determined to be improper. Or manipulating accounting. Huge, right? I know I've discussed so many of these billing violations addressed in this section, right? Whether it's here on my podcast or in articles I write or on my LinkedIn posts. But I hope this back to basics on what is exactly and precisely identified as fraud in the Medicare Program Integrity Manual has proved to be important. It's fundamental if you have Medicare as a payer to keep your eye on correct and compliant coding and billing practices and make sure you're adhering to them to ensure you are meeting the medical necessity from the very start. When the documentation paints the medical picture with clarity and vibrancy from the onset of care, a certified medical coder can then abstract codes with accuracy. And finally, in this week's inspiring quote in Spark, it's from Brené Brown. Only when we are brave enough to explore the darkness will we discover the infinite power of our light. So very true, right? I think this is a perfect quote that reminds us, inspires us on the importance of illumination. This quote reminds us about the importance of bravery. It also reminds us that we are both light and dark. Inside us all, there is darkness and light. Sometimes we encounter more darkness than light. We need to be brave and wade through the murky depths. Really work through the darkness to see the light that remains. This light really does have the power to illuminate all of us from within. I am happy Brené Brown's spark still shines on in all of us today. So that wraps up today's episode. Please go out and make this a great day, an incredible week for yourselves. Aim a little higher, do a little more, and give back in any way you can in 2021. There's so much each one of us can do. Now, in today's final note, try and feed the hungry in your local area during this holiday season. Donate those old clothes to your local charities. Purchase new items for families in need who are a little down and out this year. And children of all ages are always in need of new or gently used books. As always, I appreciate you diving into today with me. And if you want more information from me, go ahead and follow me on LinkedIn. I'll leave links to everything in the show notes below. Please continue staying safe and healthy, practice safety for one and all during our collective, seemingly never ever ending life and times of coronavirus. Thank you so much for listening in on today's episode, and I hope every week with me brings you closer to helping your providers paint a masterpiece. See you next Wednesday.